This video is a case study on Welsh nationalism. If you've watched the video on Catalonian nationalism, these two videos come with the same two disclaimers. Number one, it is an overview, and for those of you who are particularly well versed in the history and culture of Welsh nationalism, then I apologise in advance because this will be a whistle-stop tour. Secondly, I'm going to do my best to pronounce places, people, organisations and names as best as I can, but I'm not a Welsh speaker, and so again, apologies in advance for any poor pronunciations. Welsh nationalism develops in the 20th century, but that's not to say that the mindset of a Welsh nation began then. We look at the flag of Wales, which you will see flying proudly right across the country. That flag was only sort of officially the flag of Wales from 1959, and the story of Welsh nationalism goes well beyond that. Prior to English control of Wales, the region was usually ruled as several kingdoms, but there was one individual, Llywelyn ap Griffiths, who united all territories of Wales from 1055 to 1063, and you can see him pictured there on the left and his insignia below him. Now, 1063 was a bad time to be ruler of any region of England because it's just prior to the Norman invasion, and the Normans go on to control most of Wales after 1066, but controls seem to be concentrated particularly in the south, and so the north of Wales seemed to have a more distinct identity and was separated from central government control more so than the south was. And that historical distinction is still important today, and we'll come on to that later. There are, of course, many examples of rebellions against Norman or later English rule. For example, Owain Glyndŵr, who orchestrated the Glyndŵr Rising 1400 to 1415. You can see him pictured there on horseback, and you can also see that his flag inspired by Llywelyn ap Griffith. He calls, Owain Glyndŵr calls a Senedd in 1404 a parliament of Welsh nobles, and again that is going to be an inspiration for modern day politics. Wales's current devolved arrangements involve a Welsh parliament which is named now the Senedd. So there was a brief period of independence for Wales in the 15th century, and he was the last Welsh Prince of Wales. All others to hold that title afterwards have hailed from England, or certainly not from Wales. So in the Tudor period, Wales is incorporated into the Kingdom of England under Henry VIII. Now, there's an irony here that the Tudor family were of Welsh stock. They descended from Welsh ancestry, but it was Henry VIII who stripped away the Welsh legal system and Welsh language and incorporated Wales into the Kingdom of England, which means that Wales was to be ruled as England was, and that is why Wales cannot be found in the Union flag. When the Union flag was drawn in the 18th century, there is a representation for England, Scotland and Ireland, but not for Wales. And so there has been a recent campaign, certainly from within Wales, but other regions of the United Kingdom too, that the Union flag should be redesigned to incorporate Wales's place in the United Kingdom. As I said, Welsh nationalism as we know it today developed in the 20th century. In 1925, the Welsh Nationalist Party was formed, and its clear emphasis was on protecting the Welsh language, Wales's history and its culture. And there's a socialist element to the movement. It was renamed Plaid Cymru in 1945 with three aims. The first being self-government for Wales. Secondly, safeguarding the culture, traditions, language and economy in Wales. And then finally, a self-governing independent state. Now, in the 1960s, Plaid Cymru begins to attract younger, non-Welsh speaking members from South Wales, and that begins to change the direction of the party, and that's why certainly it began to adopt left-wing politics and policies from the 1960s onwards. And to this day, Plaid Cymru remains the leading political party desiring Welsh independence. For most Welsh nationalists, there will be a range of opinions from greater devolution right the way through to full independence for the people of Wales. If you'll have seen the Catalonian case study, you'll see that there are very many different ideas of where the nation goes from its current situation, and that is the same with Welsh nationalism. There are very many different views and opinions within the Welsh nationalist movement. On the previous slide, we talked about the Glendower Rising of the 15th century. This is going to also consider rebellion against the English. In the 19th century, in 1831, the Merthyr Rising, a working class rebellion against low wages and high unemployment in the region. The crowd were heard shouting in their native Welsh, "Cheese and bread, and down with the king." And the army was sent in by the government of the time at Westminster to restore order, and it led to clashes between protesters and the armed forces. Of an interesting note, this was certainly a working class movement that had both a nationalist element to it, but also a socialist element to it as well. And this is the first time that we see the red flag being flown and used as a symbol of socialist politics. And the red flag will go on to become an important symbol for the socialist movement, particularly in Britain, but other countries too. This is the first time that it is seen in Britain in the Merthyr Rising. As a result, there were 26 arrests, 24 people had been killed in the violence. Two of the protesters were found guilty of, one was found guilty of robbery, the other was found guilty of stabbing a soldier, and were sentenced to hanging. One of them had their sentence commuted, and like many others, were transported to Australia, which was not an uncommon punishment at the time. So we had one person who was eventually hanged in Cardiff for their part in the Merthyr Rising, others forcibly transported to Australia, and others in prison. In the late 19th century, in 1886, we get Cymru Fydd, which was founded by a group of leading nationalist politicians, but it also included David Lloyd George, and the aim was to establish a Welsh government. Now, that movement collapsed in 1896, but it showed a growing movement towards an orchestrated nationalist movement that's starting to define clearer aims. Now, quite often, if you study devolution in paper 1, you'll be aware of Wales's current arrangements and the existence of Plaid Cymru. We can see that there is certainly a democratic element to Welsh nationalism, and modern Welsh nationalism is dominated by peaceful means. However, we do have some examples of the threat and the use of violence in the name of Welsh nationalism. First of all, a group known simply as the Republicans in 1952 unsuccessfully tried to blow up a pipeline that connected Wales to Birmingham. In the 1960s, we get two violent groups that emerge: the Mediad am Diffyn Cymru, which is the Movement for the Defence of Wales, MAC, or the Bythyn Thriffid Cymru Free Wales Army. And you can see the symbol of the Free Wales Army at the top of the screen there. Those two groups emerged in the 1960s, and both were involved in violent attacks. MAC, the Movement for the Defence of Wales, were involved in several bombing attacks on water pipelines and power lines, particularly in the 1960s. In the 1980s, we get the Maybe Glyndŵr, the Sons of Glyndŵr, and they emerge as a movement, again, trying to establish a violent form of Welsh nationalism. And in the 1980s, there was a spate of arson attacks on holiday homes. You can see an individual there, Sean Aubrey Roberts, who in 2023 admitted to his role in the arson attacks on English-owned holiday homes in Anglesey. He admitted to burning roughly 200 English-owned holiday homes. In 1993, he was jailed for 12 years on explosives charges, but was never directly found guilty of the arson attacks. It is only in 2023 that he has admitted his role in those. And the reason for the attacks on English-owned properties, particularly in Anglesey, is it became a getaway for the English middle class. Later in the 20th century, it became a working class English destination as well. You may speak to family members whose family spent weekends in Portmaddock or Rhyl or Pwllheli or Anglesey, and what has happened in these areas of Wales is property prices have been driven up because of the demand for property in Wales, which are simply second homes for middle class English tourists or part-time visitors. And so this resentment with what was happening to Anglesey in particular caused the Sons of Glyndŵr to act in the manner that they did. This slide is all about the Welsh language, and there is a very clear link to key thinker number 3, von Herder, who believes in that intrinsic relationship between the Volk, the people, the nation, and shared language. And that is absolutely central to Welsh nationalism. And so we're going to talk about the importance of the Welsh language in its history and culture now. In 1911, for the first time, English became more spoken as a first language than Welsh in Wales. 44% of people spoke Welsh as a first language in 1911. And actually, modern census data shows that that has fallen further still. In 2021, only 18% of the Welsh population can speak Welsh. But there are differences depending on the regions in which you live. People speak Welsh more commonly in North East Wales. In Gwynedd, 64% of people speak Welsh, and in Anglesey, 56%. There does seem to be a north-south divide where Welsh is more predominantly spoken in the north and northeast of Wales than it is in the south. However, government legislation and attempts have been made to improve upon that. In 1967, the UK government passed the Welsh Language Act, which gave some rights to the use of the Welsh language in official documentation, and repealed an old law which defined England as including Wales within it. So that Welsh Language Act of 1967 was an important milestone. That was further improved upon in 1993 with another Welsh Language Act, which put Welsh and English on an equal footing in Wales. It formed the Welsh Language Board. Today that's a Welsh Language Commissioner. And so what we can see is that Westminster is becoming increasingly willing to promote and preserve the Welsh language. In 1982, S4C became the first Welsh-speaking TV channel, and that still exists to this day and has its own sports channel too. And while we're on the topic of sports, I want to talk very briefly about 2022 when Wales qualified for the World Cup in Qatar, and the anthem that took them there was Iamar o Hyd, which is a song written by a Welsh nationalist in 1983. And the author and the singer of the song is a man by the name of Dafydd Iwan, and he, one time, was the president of Plaid Cymru. And he is a folk singer that has tried throughout his career to promote and preserve the Welsh language. And Yammer o Hyd translates to "we are still here," and you can see there that the key line in the song, "despite everyone and everything, we're still here." And the Welsh team invited Dafydd Iwan to come and sing the song to the crowd, and the players and the crowd joined in, and that encapsulated the spirit of the nation of the time. The song itself is about the preservation of Welsh history and culture and language. We are still here, despite what has happened to us, despite what has been thrown our way. The Welsh identity remains, and that passion and that pride in your nationhood is something that helped to inspire the Welsh football team in 2022. But like the video on Catalonian nationalism, it's not clear that Welsh nationalism desires an independent nation state from the United Kingdom. In 2007, a survey suggested that 20% of people in Wales favoured the idea of a Wales independent from the rest of the UK. A YouGov poll in 2015 saw that figure had dropped to just 17%. If you can look back to paper one, referendums, you'll know that even the creation of the Welsh Assembly as it was in the late 1990s was a very slender 50.3% yes vote on a 50% turnout. So you've roughly got 1 in 4 Welsh voters that wanted a devolved assembly in the late 1990s. Now, support for devolution and increased powers has grown with time, and the Senedd is more powerful and more autonomous than the Welsh Assembly was when it was first formed in the late 1990s. But it seems to me that Welsh nationalism is more about a preservation of the language, the history and the culture of the Welsh people than it is a desire to annex itself from the rest of the United Kingdom. But there will be Welsh nationalists that challenge that and will desire an independent Wales. But stats or recent polling data suggests that those individuals are currently in the minority. Okay, again, if you've watched the Catalonian video, you'll know that the 3 paradoxes of nationalism are that nationalism is both peaceful and violent, both democratic and dictatorial, and looks both forwards and backwards. And what I'm trying to do with each case study is give my opinion on where a particular form of nationalism fits. Now, despite some isolated examples of violence, I think that Welsh nationalism is largely a peaceful nationalism. And then I would also say that Welsh nationalism is quite firmly democratic. I think what you tend to find is that peaceful nationalism fits with democratic nationalism. It would be rare to find a peaceful but dictatorial nationalism. Those two seem to come hand in hand. So I would say that Welsh nationalism is, on the whole, both peaceful and democratic. And then finally, Welsh nationalism. Does it look forwards or backwards? I'm going to say that Welsh nationalism looks backwards. And that's not a negative, that's not a slight against Welsh nationalism. I don't think there is a clear focus for the Welsh nation and the Welsh people and what the future holds for them. I think that Welsh nationalism on the whole is a desire of a people to be able to express their language, their culture and their history within the larger nation state in which they exist. I think that is why there is unclear support for devolution in the late 1990s. I also think it might be why there are very few nationalists that desire an independent Wales. I don't think there is a clear, distinct concept of what the future holds for Wales in the eyes of Welsh nationalists. So for me, I think that Welsh nationalism looks backwards at the culture and the history and the language of Wales and seeks to preserve it and promote it for future generations.